Bruce Lee was invited to perform in a martial arts display. The organizers of the event had planned on him being a gimmick, but what happened next left everyone stunned. The polished wooden floors of the Hamilton Pavilion glowed under the stage lights, and a row of martial arts banners fluttered slightly in the light breeze from a ceiling fan overhead. The crowd shuffled in slowly, murmuring with polite anticipation. It was March 1966, and the San Francisco Martial Arts Display, a mid-level exhibition put on by the Pacific Coast Martial Federation, was preparing for its biggest turnout yet. This year, organizers had added something a little different to the program. Something, or rather someone, they hoped would sell more tickets. Bruce Lee read the hand-drawn poster at the entrance. Star of the upcoming TV series The Green Hornet, see his lightning-fast skills live. Backstage, Bruce Lee stretched silently, unnoticed by most of the performers around him. His movements were fluid and effortless, more like a dancer warming up than a fighter. At just 25 years old, Bruce was still a name spoken with curiosity, not reverence. He hadn't yet shocked the world with Enter the Dragon or launched Jeet Kune Do into public consciousness. In fact, most of the martial arts community viewed him as more of a television novelty than a serious practitioner. To them, he was a flashy face, invited to the display purely as a gimmick, and many of the older masters in the back rows made no effort to hide that opinion. It was clear that they didn't have much respect for a man they assumed was just a TV star. One of them, a stern-eyed Shotokan sensei named Masaru Watanabe, watched Bruce with folded arms. "This is what martial arts has become," he muttered to a fellow instructor. "Actors doing kicks for applause." The man beside him nodded. "He moves fast, sure, but so do jugglers." Bruce heard none of it, or more likely ignored it. He continued stretching, his breathing calm. To anyone paying attention, he didn't seem nervous. In fact, he looked interested, like someone about to observe rather than perform. The display began with a formal bowing. Dozens of practitioners from across disciplines lined up: Taekwondo, Kung Fu, Aikido, Kenpo, and even some Western boxing demonstrations. Each school had 10 minutes to showcase its skills. Bruce had been slotted second to last, right before the closing ceremony. As the first performances began, high kicks, synchronized katas, board breaks, the crowd reacted with polite claps. The movements were sharp, traditional, and precise. The announcer, an aging judo master with a booming voice, praised the lineage of each school. 4 generations of Okinawan tradition. Direct students of IP Man. Third-degree black belts certified in Korea. Every performance was steeped in heritage. Everything was orderly, expected. Bruce watched them all with genuine interest, nodding occasionally but never clapping. Not out of arrogance, but because he was studying. The man who'd invited him, a wiry dojo manager named Phil Trainer, leaned over during the intermission. "Bruce, remember, 5 minutes tops. Just give them some kicks, show off that lightning jab. Maybe throw in a backflip or something. The audience loves that stuff." Bruce didn't look at him. "You invited me to be a gimmick," he said flatly. "But that's not what I came here for." Phil blinked. "Wait, what?" Bruce finally turned, his face calm. "You'll see." By the time Bruce was announced, nearly 2 hours had passed. Some audience members had begun trickling out, assuming the best was behind them. The announcer's tone became suddenly theatrical. And now, straight from Hollywood, the man with the fastest hands in television, Bruce Lee. Scattered applause followed. A few teenagers in the back who recognized him whistled. Bruce stepped onto the floor wearing a plain black Kung Fu uniform. No fancy colors, nothing flashy. He stood in the center of the floor. For a few long seconds, he said nothing. Then he addressed the audience, not in a shout, but in a calm, measured voice that carried to the far corners of the gym. "What is martial arts?" he asked, scanning the room. "Is it tradition? Repetition? Or is it the ability to adapt, to express yourself honestly in combat?" The room quieted. The teenagers in the back lowered their popcorn. Bruce continued, "Many of you here can perform incredible techniques. But what happens when those techniques are interrupted? When a real opponent doesn't move the way your forms expect?" Someone near the front scoffed under their breath. Bruce dropped into a simple stance. "Rather than tell you, I'd like to show you." He turned to the audience. "If anyone would like to spar, light contact, controlled, come forward. Any style." For a moment, there was awkward silence. Sparring wasn't part of the program, and certainly not in front of an audience. But then, a young karate brown belt stepped forward, perhaps seeing an opportunity to score some attention. Bruce bowed. The man bowed back. The match lasted 5 seconds. The karateka moved in with a textbook step-in punch. Bruce shifted, parried, and tapped his opponent's chest before the man had even completed the movement. There was no injury, just confusion. The man blinked, realizing he had been stopped mid-flow. Polite applause followed. Another volunteer stepped forward. This time, a taekwondo practitioner. The outcome was the same, but faster. Then came a third, a boxer. Bruce adapted effortlessly to each style, moving with such speed that the audience began murmuring. They leaned forward in their seats. Even the skeptical masters were now watching closely, their arms no longer folded. But Bruce wasn't mocking his opponents. Each time he sparred, he finished with a bow, then turned back to the crowd and explained what had happened. This punch came from the shoulder. He didn't rotate his hips, that's why it lacked speed. This kick was beautiful, but predictable. I saw the chamber before he launched. This guard, he nodded to the boxer, is strong in the ring, but against a foot sweep, it leaves the base vulnerable. He was teaching, not taunting. A stillness settled over the gym. What happened next, one onlooker would later write, was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It stopped being a performance. It became a lesson, one that humbled every fighter in that room. Back in the shadows, Masaru Watanabe stood with arms at his sides, no longer frowning. He watched as Bruce moved with clarity, speed, and most surprisingly, respect. Bruce turned again to the crowd. Martial arts is not about following a script. It's about finding the truth in movement. You cannot predict your opponent. You must feel them. React without thought. That's the essence of combat. He invited one final challenger. There was a long pause. Then slowly, Masaru stepped forward. The room held its breath. Everyone assumed he was going to challenge Bruce to test this young man who had just dismantled every technique placed in front of him. But instead, the Grandmaster walked to the center of the mat, stood before Bruce, and bowed deeply. Not just a nod, but a full bow from the waist, the kind reserved for a teacher. Then he spoke quietly. I had forgotten why I began martial arts. Thank you for reminding me. The silence that followed Grandmaster Masaru's bow seemed to stretch out across the gym like a held breath. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the kids in the back, who had been giggling earlier during board breaks and spinning kicks, now sat wide-eyed. Bruce returned the bow slowly, his expression one of calm gratitude, not pride. What had started as a gimmick had turned into something no one had expected, least of all the organizers. Up on the balcony, Phil Traynor stood frozen. He had initially booked Bruce as a promotional afterthought, meant to be flashy filler between the real displays. He'd imagined the audience might cheer a little, maybe get a laugh or two out of Bruce's speed. But now, people weren't cheering. They were reflecting, listening, learning. Just like that, the entire energy in the room shifted. Masaru turned to the audience and raised his voice. This young man has demonstrated something that many of us forget. Speed and power mean little without understanding. Forms mean little without feeling. We become rigid when we stop questioning. And when we stop questioning, we stop growing. Another master, this one from a kung fu school, stood up and applauded slowly. Then another followed. Then the entire front row. It wasn't the roaring ovation of a stadium rock concert. It was more meaningful. A slow building, rising applause, the kind that came from recognition and respect. Bruce stood motionless, bowing his head once again in humility. The announcer, unsure how to follow the moment, returned to the microphone with a shake in his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Bruce Lee. Bruce stepped down quietly, returning backstage as others filed out. He moved through the narrow hallway, past stunned performers and instructors who parted to let him pass. Some nodded, some gave small bows. A few, still wrestling with pride, looked away. But even they could no longer dismiss what they had seen. Backstage, Phil caught up with him, slightly out of breath. Bruce, what the hell was that? Bruce smiled, not unkindly. You asked me to be a gimmick. I figured I might as well surprise you. Phil looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or apologize. You've got everyone talking. The whole room was, man, I don't even have the words. Bruce patted his shoulder lightly. That's good. Martial arts should make you feel something, not just follow something. By the time Bruce left the pavilion an hour later, the night air had turned cold. A few remaining students lingered outside, excitedly reenacting what they'd seen. Poor imitations of Bruce's smooth footwork and lightning-fast blocks. He paused at the steps and watched them for a moment, then walked off into the darkness, hands in his pockets. The next morning, The San Francisco Examiner ran a short column buried near the back pages. It wasn't a big feature, but it left an impact. The write-up described how an unknown TV actor had stolen the entire martial arts display, not with theatrics, but with truth. It quoted Masaru Watanabe. It mentioned the silent awe of the crowd. And most of all, it reflected on how Bruce Lee had turned a simple invitation into something unforgettable. Word began to spread slowly but steadily. Over the following weeks, letters came into the Pacific Coast Martial Federation, some from instructors who had attended, some from dojos that had only heard about what happened. A few expressed disbelief. Others expressed gratitude. But all admitted one thing. Something had shifted. Back at Masaru's own dojo, things changed in small but noticeable ways. Students who once fixated solely on forms began asking questions. Classes became more exploratory. Masaru, once rigid and traditional in every teaching, now incorporated moments of reflection. He allowed students to mix techniques, to test, to adapt. He kept a photo of that night on the wall, a simple black and white still of Bruce mid-spar, blurred from motion, his hands open in fluid readiness. Meanwhile, Bruce returned to his work on the Green Hornet. On set, he performed choreographed fights with such intensity that even seasoned stuntmen asked if he could slow down. He couldn't, or rather, he wouldn't. Hollywood still viewed him as exotic background talent. But in the martial arts world, especially among those who were in that gym on that quiet night in 1966, Bruce Lee had already become something much more. The event was never televised. There were no viral clips, no YouTube uploads to freeze the moment in time. And yet, those who were there never forgot. The memory became legend, a story passed down from teacher to student. He wasn't even supposed to be there, they'd say. He was just meant to be a gimmick. But what happened? Well, it really was unbelievable. In later years, as Bruce's fame exploded across continents, those who had once doubted him watched in silent awe as the world caught up. The philosophies he expressed that night, about flow, truth, and adaptation, became the backbone of Jeet Kune Do. And Jeet Kune Do itself became more than a system. It became a challenge to the very idea of systems. One afternoon, nearly a decade later, a former student from the San Francisco event visited Masaru's dojo. He had moved cities, changed careers, but had never forgotten that moment with Bruce Lee. He brought his son along, a shy teenager with a fascination for martial arts but little confidence. "Do you still talk about that night?" the man asked. Masaru smiled. "We don't just talk about it, we live by it." He motioned to the wall. The boy looked up at the photo of Bruce Lee, frozen mid-movement. "Is that really him?" the boy asked. Masaru nodded. "Yes, that's the man who taught us to keep asking questions." The boy studied the image for a long time, and for the first time in years, Masaru saw a spark, small but bright, ignite in the eyes of a new student. What Bruce had done that night wasn't just perform. He had reminded a generation of martial artists what the discipline was really about. Not showing off, not clinging to tradition for tradition's sake, but about movement, honesty, and self-discovery. He had arrived as a gimmick, but left as a legend, a whisper that would echo through every dojo he'd touched. And even now, decades later, whenever martial artists gather to demonstrate their skills, there's always a quiet pause, a glance to the side, a memory shared by someone older to someone younger about the night that Bruce Lee reminded them of the true purpose of martial arts. What is your favorite Bruce Lee moment? Has his legend inspired you in any way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.